All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Melanie Alvin. I'm the Artistic Director at Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. We're so happy to have you all here this afternoon for our screening and panel of our Legacy and Lineage series. We actually released these films last year in May 2020. However, we never were able to screen them all together as one program. So we're really excited to be able to do that today. I just wanted to shout out a couple of my staff members for gratitude, especially Vinay Patel, if you're here, Diana Lee, who's doing our tech in the back end, as well as Kim Arteche, who is been helping with the admin and just getting this program together so quickly. So thank you guys for helping with that. Just a quick land acknowledgement as well. We are tuning in from unceded Ohlone land. If you'd like to tell us where you are coming from, feel free to do so in the chat as well. Also wanted to quickly say that we are in solidarity with the fight for Black lives, as well as the fight for social justice and racial equity. And this program, as you will see in just a moment, speaks a lot towards that. So. And just another thing is I'm very thankful to have the privilege to be able to gather with you all here in a virtual space, especially during this pandemic when we can't be together, in person. And so it's always nice to be able to gather virtually and be able to see each other and highlight our artists during this time, despite the fact that we cannot do that in person. Some really quick housekeeping things. If you need live captioning, it is available down at the bottom of your Zoom panel. There should be an arrow that says a live transcript. So you can click on that. If you need the live captioning, it will caption anything that I am saying live, as well as when the videos start playing. Another thing to note is that this is being recorded live and streamed on APICC's YouTube. And then if you have any questions, we are doing a Q&A with the artists and some of the organizers at the end. So feel free to use the chat or the Q&A button down at the bottom of your panel if you want to ask any further questions about the films, the artists, anything that comes to mind. And then just one quick announcement. We are doing our annual United States of Asia America Festival in May and June this year. We just chose our artists, so we're really excited to announce them soon. So just keep a lookout for that. And then, yeah, so we're just gonna get our program started now. Really quick, I just wanted to intro our Legacy and Lineage Program Director, Laura Priscilla Paule, as she also was our Office and Communications Manager from 2014 to 2019. But we're really happy to have her back for this program to intro the films and just, come here and say hello for the screening. So I'm gonna turn it over now to Laura. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Diana, for doing the backstage spotlighting work, and thank you, Melanie, for the intro. Like she said, my name is Laura Paule. She, her, tuning in virtually from unceded Ohlone land. And yeah, I worked at APICC for just about 5 years. And that's kind of where this project kind of came from. I was lucky enough in my role at APICC, even though my role was office and communications focused, I was lucky enough to have an opportunity to do a number of programming work, a lot of it film and video kind of screenings and projects and things like that, because that's where my background was in film studies and film history and that kind of medium. And the beginnings of this project, before we kind of get into the screening, I'll just talk a little bit about the origins and the intentions behind these short films, and hopefully kind of it'll provide some context into our discussion later. So the ideas for this project kind of started off in around 2019, which absolutely feels like a lifetime ago. So around that time, we were just thinking about, on top of the festival that Melanie was talking about that APICC does every year, we do these other projects where we present artwork and ways in which we can support Asian American Pacific Islander artists who reflect the experiences of their communities and really address those experiences and issues as well. And, you know, we've done a number of projects where we just go to an artist, say, you know, ask them what they want to do and then support them that way. But I was thinking of, you know, what are ways in which we can support our artists doing really great work that's not necessarily things that they think of right away or things that they are concerned about so immediately. You know, they're so focused on their own work. You know, what are other areas that we can kind of take care of or we can kind of address for them? And at the time I realized that there was a lot of legacy or recognition work happening, especially for folks and artists in the San Francisco Bay Area who've been doing this work for so long, who are community-focused artists, who've been doing it for decades, who were the first ones doing the work that they were doing. And, you know, I recognize the importance of just documenting and recognizing and acknowledging the work of the people, you know, who are really contributing so much to our community. And also recognizing that we're lucky in the San Francisco Bay Area where there is something of a history, a rich history and legacy of specifically Asian Pacific Islander artists, community folk, educators who are really working towards community building and empowerment and fighting oppression in the different forms that it takes. So I thought, you know, let's do something where we get to talk to those people about those experiences, how and why they came to be doing this work, and, you know, kind of finding a way where we can document that and make it accessible to everybody. When we started talking about who we would approach to be part of this project, it was almost like a very easy process because, you know, APICC has such a tight relationship with so many artists, so many great artists. And, you know, we kind of came up with a short list and very conveniently and luckily all 5 of them said yes. The reason we did 5 is because that just seemed like a good number. Especially considering, you know, it takes so much time and effort to create a short film that would feel worthwhile and rich enough where we get a sense of like, okay, this is who this person is. And yeah, given our time and capacity, it seemed like, okay, we can do 5. But even if, you know, something happened and any of these folks weren't able to participate, you know, there's such a rich community. There's so many folks doing really great things in the API art world in the Bay Area that, you know, there's so many people we could have done this project with, but we are fortunate enough to have this set of folks that you'll see their stories soon. I don't want to say too much about what you can kind of glean from each film. We tried to make each video reflective of the tone and the kind of aesthetic that these different artists have and kind of emanated like through their personalities and through their own work, which you'll see you know, they're writers and dancers and musicians, and, you know, we have a real diversity of genre and real diversity of, you know, what their work really entails. But some of the things that these folks really have in common that I saw was that they found a way through their artwork to address in some form oppression, to reflect and to address it and to point it out, which is a really difficult thing to do. You know, it's already really hard to be an artist, right? To be someone who is trying to sustain themselves as an artist, but to also use your art to look at these things that not necessarily everyone wants to look at, to seek justice when not necessarily everyone is looking for that, and to argue that it's needed, is really difficult and challenging work. So the one thing that I really wanted to get to in each of these videos is why. And I think you'll see each artist and their response as to why they're doing this work. And I think what we'll talk about a bit later is, and what you'll kind of see in the videos, the responses address that, you know, they say something to the effect that this is needed, that we still need to fight oppression in all of its forms. And as we've seen in the last year, kinds of oppression that have been manifesting really violently, really overtly, specifically for the Asian American community. Yeah, these are things that are still happening, and we still need to, you know, do what we fight against it. So I think that's it for me. I guess I'll throw it over to Diana whenever you're ready to start these films. And sorry, one quick shout out, Willis Lai and Diana Chen. They are the amazing video and editing team that helped make this possible. So thanks.
To me, coming up in the 60s and 70s, there was a strong, very powerful relationship between the making of art and the making of social change. And of course, that was, at the center of that was the Black Arts Movement. So that meant that someone like myself getting involved in the Asian American movement at the time was how to look at the connection between that kind of music making and the making of change. Well, I was born not far from here at St. Francis Hospital, just over the hill, and lived in San Francisco for about 3 years until we moved out, and where I mainly grew up in South San Francisco. And I was very fortunate at the time, during that period of time of the 60s and into the early 70s, that we had pretty good public school music programs. So that's how I got introduced to music. But I also took private violin lessons as well. It also was a great time because it was, of course, pre-digital. And most of the music that you heard, there was just a lot of live music at events. Like, for example, some of my first experiences with music was going and seeing parades, and so that's when I got interested in music, is because of kind of this pageantry and big sound of the marching bands. And it was hard to get away from the idea about being Chinese, because at that time, being Chinese is a very contentious, reality. So just like today, it's a very contentious reality. Who's Chinese, right? Is Chinese a political identity? Is it a cultural identity? So for me, and my growing up, hearing the stories from my parents and why they were here had to do with, both those questions, politics and culture. And for them, since they were refugees, it was mostly about politics. Growing up in South San Francisco, we didn't necessarily belong because there weren't that many of us. Although when I was in high school, we did form a Chinese, informal Chinese movement in the school. So that's kind of how it kind of came together, and having to do with the politics of being Chinese in the world. Also understand music as a function within communities. So at that time I was going to community festivals here in Chinatown and Japantown, and understanding that music was part of what kept the community together, what keeps the community strong. and also has a role in creating visionary, a vision for the kind of society we want to make. I was invited to participate in the launching of Eastwind magazine. There was a fundraiser at Christ United over in Japantown, and Eddie Wong invited me and John Jang to come play. And so we did a performance, and also at that performance actually was Genny Lim. And so I remember that evening pretty vividly, and it was in December of 1982, and I was pretty nervous, but Genny Lim got up there and she did this impression of John Wayne, and it's just like this interaction between her and this cowboy hero, and I guess everybody was just laughing so hard, and I think I lost my nervousness. John and I went on to perform, and we were well received, and really that was the beginning of a very fruitful relationship that I have with John Jang, and then of course with later we would start performing with Genny Lim. There's a lot of challenges to being an artist. There's a lot of challenges to being an Asian American artist, because our families don't think that it's rewarding enough financially. And it's a little bit difficult for our families who maybe were the first generation of artists in our family. It's a little difficult to grasp the value of it, because we don't get paid a lot of money and we're not famous, especially our generation. I mean, I think it's kind of nice. Some of our artists, younger artists, are getting famous. That's great. But for our generation, we never had the idea that we would be famous. We just wanted to do this work because we thought it was important and it expressed who we were. We have to operate a little bit in a little bit of a double consciousness, where on the one hand, we're here to support the community, but the community doesn't always understand. I wouldn't say that they didn't support us, but they don't really necessarily understand what we're trying to do. So it becomes difficult to reconcile some of the community work with artistic work. I would say our efforts, which are a work in progress, to combine our stories with artistic excellence. We still need to do that, because we have still not made enough progress in our educational institutions and even our community institutions towards a marriage of cultural integrity and artistic excellence, because most of the time artistic excellence goes more in a European direction. So that's what folks like myself need to hang on to. We need to hang on to that. Essentially what we were trying to do and what we try to do is still revolutionary in this time. It's not like the society's really moved that far in our direction that we don't have to worry about it. We still have to be concerned about that. And that's why we still need hashtag Black Lives Matter. We still need to say no more concentrations. We still need those things. And so we still need to create art and tools for making that art which reflect that basic thrust of changing society. This basic night from operation artists with the Chinatown Community Development Center. And rather than add another cultural center or art center, we were interested in creating someplace where we could work. We are going to make work here, and that artists are going to come in here and do what we're doing right now. We're having rehearsals, like Kearney Street's going to be coming to do a rehearsal. Well, Lenora Lee is going to have her dancers come in and work on their pieces in here. And, you know, we will have performances and audiences in here, but the idea is to actually make a space that we can say that the work was made here. I guess my hope is that we are able to make the work for ourselves, not for someone else.
I don't really think about my legacy. I really think about the present and what impact I can make right now in the relationships that I build, in the way that I create. If I do leave a lasting impact that another person or a group of people find to be impactful, then I'm honored that they can feel that. Hi, my name is Sammy See, and I am a multimedia artist and muralist based in San Francisco. So I was born here in San Francisco, and I actually grew up in the East Bay, so in Oakland and in Berkeley. And growing up, my life was pretty low-key. I was a pretty quiet kid, and I stuck a lot to myself as a young person. And then in my teen years, I started to really dive into my artwork as a way to deal with a lot of like the trials and tribulations and the discomforts of becoming a teen and entering my womanhood. I really found early on that my creative life was a part of my survival in a lot of senses. And so my growing up years, with the support of my family, my mom, my dad, my younger brother, I really got to start to hone on what it meant for me to be an artist. And I had a good childhood where I got to explore and be rebellious and also really find myself and what it meant to be a creative person. And my mom, bless her heart, is one of the most organized, fierce, analytical boss ladies that I've ever had the privilege to even be around. And she grew me early on to really understand the power of having an arc and a trajectory in my life, and learning to visualize how I saw myself and what I wanted to become, and then make concrete steps and plans to try and make my vision a reality. So my family is the reason why I'm brave enough and maybe a little crazy enough to become an artist. And so you can see that as a thread in my work. I really celebrate the women in my life that, by example, show me what it means to be Phil Ab. And I celebrate their stories and want to preserve and uplift the ways that they have taught me how to be a strong, independent, confident, and compassionate women. The people that I met here in San Francisco through the arts have been so critical to me developing the work that I do as an artist. I remember going to an event at Manila Town, and just to go to see the artwork there and meeting a friend of mine, Sammay Dizon, for the first time, and initially clicking with her, understanding that, hey, there's so many of the same questions that we're trying to seek and trying to answer through different means. And one, connection after the other, I'm connected to a whole nother group of folks through APICC and through different creative communities that really strive to be critical in conversations about the work that we're doing, place the artwork that we do within a larger diasporic conversation. And I think that's really played a lot into how I choose to create my mural work. I've had so many incredible collaborators, yet I can think of one that's been most memorable, and it's with a group called the Babies, which is an all-women muralist crew that I had the great honor to collaborate with. Collaborating with these group of women has truly shown me the power of what happens when women come together and create a space to tell our stories. In a male-dominated field that is public art and muralism, it was so refreshing to get to work with these group of women who are just shifting culture and changing the way that we look at public art. The nature of public art is that it's transient. Sometimes you'll put your heart and soul into something and it will be gone the next day. And I think for me, that's a reflection of how I see my work. It's here, it makes its resonance in the way that it does in this moment, and it may be gone, but that impact and that energy that I put in that space and time is really what's most valuable to me. The Kapwa Rising mural was a collaboration with the Filipino Mental Health Initiative in San Francisco. My collaborator, Monica Magtodo, also a film artist, and I designed and painted this project. And our hope with it was that it would be an invitation and a reminder that our art practice is not only healing ourselves as we paint, but it can also heal our relationships and in community as well. And this project was a mural that I dreamed that maybe we would be able to use to talk about mental health. We face a severe challenge in the Filipino American community and Asian American communities as a whole, in that mental health is highly stigmatized, and often it's a barrier for folks to communicate about their needs, know where to seek help or how to seek help if they need it. And that fact was very personal to me, because growing up, I faced severe mental health challenges that nearly ended my life. And so part of my dedication in community and as an artist is to aim to prevent and position myself so that I can minimize that possibility in whatever way that I might have the power to. And so the Kapwa Rising mural was one offering that I made to really try to elevate the conversation about how our health and our well-being in our minds and in our bodies is directly connected to how we express our cultural heritage. And Kapwa, meaning our shared self, or meaning the way that I see you in myself and our connectedness, was really a vehicle to talk about how we care about each other. And so for 6 months, I worked with several different South of Market-based Filipino organizations to do design workshops and talk about what kapwa meant in the context of caring for one another's health and our mental health. There's been so many challenges that I faced in installing mural projects. Not only is it really physically demanding, but finding space is a hard thing to do in San Francisco at this time. So at every single level, there's always a hurdle that I feel like we maybe have to jump over to create a project. The most challenging thing has really been working to believe and continuously remind myself that as a young woman and an emerging artist, I deserve to be able to make this work and share my story, and that it's vital that all different perspectives and all different lenses have a space to be recorded in our collective history. To the younger gen of artists that are already becoming the future of art as we know it, I salute you. I want you to know that you are completely supported and you have the full right to express your story, your style, and create something that's completely new, and that tradition and protocols are important guides for how we can learn how to move in the world, but also learn to break them and create new spaces that your spirit, that your creative self can fly in. And I wish that I could live forever to see all of the incredible works that are coming through the portals, and also know that I'm here. I want to see and support in whatever way that I possibly can, because it's in the support that I've gotten from my elders that allows me to be able to do the creative work that I do today.
I'm writing a story inspired by my family. As I'm writing, I'm discovering that actually I don't know the truth, and I may never know the truth. So every day I write a few hours. I write in French by hands, because it's the only way for me to access a certain voice that I've lost through immigration and another language. Because I grew up writing poetry, reading a lot of French literature, my language is very different. I think I had to spend a lot of years to entrain myself to decolonize my mind from all those romantic ideals from Russian writers and 19th century French writers. So that's my heart project, and I do it for my 10-year-old self. Being a writer, being an artist, being an educator, being an activist was not something I thought I will ever do. I always had aspirations to write, though, to tell stories. I think around the end of the Vietnam War, there was a lot of stress on my family. I didn't know why. But incidents happened that I remember when I was 10, I told myself, in order to get going, that I will write the story. And that promise I kept it. It's in me, and although even when I was a manicured, although I didn't know about schooling, that's one thing I will always aspire to do, to write my family story. So my mother is Vietnamese and my father is French, and I was born in France, and I immigrated to the US in 1984. Growing up in France was difficult for me because I was always called like Chinese, or in France it's called Shintok. I'm a mixed race, but when I was little I looked more Asians, and there was a lot of racism. Also, my parents were different than other couple because my father was 30 years older than my mother, and they were both a little bit outcasts of French society. And as a kid, I always had journals. I mean, I was really outcast in France. People don't realize how much. Sometimes I will not go to class, but I will go in the wood and read poetry, write poetry. So this is kind of my coping mechanism. It's almost my anchor to survival. It was almost my companion, was my imaginations, to try to transcribe my emotions or my perceptions of the world into words. I didn't think about becoming an artist. It just did. Coming to the US was also very difficult. The reason why my mother sent me here with one-way ticket when I was 19 was for me to sponsor her. But she sent me to live with her Vietnamese family in Orange County, and they sent me to work as a manicured right away. And I did not know about school or secondary education, universities. I eventually went from Orange County to Fremont, and I went to community college there. And I was living in a house, basically cleaning lady, the therapist. And one day, their daughter came from UC Davis, and I asked her a question. I said, "Oh, what do you do? Where do you go to school?" And then the man in the background, the father, said, "Don't even need to know, Isabelle, because UC is not for people like you." This is the only reason I started to think of UC, because I was challenged. And I was lucky. I got accepted. And then I stayed there for graduate school and got my doctorate in Vietnamese American literature. So to be a professor is an accident. To be French, Vietnamese, Americans, for a long time I did not do public readings or even think I could write and publish my stories because I didn't think there was room for a story like mine in this country. In the US, Vietnamese American literature is quite marginal compared to even other Asian American literary texts, and even more so in American society. It was not very much visible, and if it was with certain expectations of what a Vietnamese American story looks like. Certain story that emphasized the refugee experience was more popular and more likely to be published. So 10 years ago, I thought of starting an organization, and I called my good friends Viet Thanh. We were graduate students together at UC Berkeley, and we were in this group called Ink and Blood that centered the stories of Vietnamese American poets and writers. At that time, when I will use the word diasporic in other settings, it was not always welcome. There was really an emphasis of centering the domestic and not the diasporic. Well, Vietnamese were scattered from different places in the world. It's because of the war, because of colonialism. It's very common for large families to be scattered in different parts of the world. So this diasporic experience really unpacked Vietnamese American identities. Why does it have to be memoir within the context of the Vietnam War? Yes, it's very important, and it also serves as a resolution of the Vietnam War for Americans. Why can't we write about love, social science fiction, or nature, or something else? We really also wanted to encourage, to create space that provide opportunities for writers to write about anything they wanted. So that was also the drive behind forming an organization that was more progressive, that did not emphasize authenticity, but also make our voice stronger and push back against prejudice. And those perspectives sometimes did not coincide with people in Asian American studies, right? Asian Americanist. When I try to bring writers from different countries together to reflect that experience, in the process, I'm gaining strength to think that my story is also valid, that there is now room for me. To be where I am now, to live here in San Francisco, to be a professor, to get to work with artists, to even think that I can write a story and be published, this is more than a dream come true. And I don't take any of this as granted. I was always touched by unfairness. And to do something about it in my own scale, it's my work, it's my passion. To tell my story is part of that work, because as I write, it's not only just about me and tell my story. I'm thinking about points I want to make and put out there. And I think, especially now, we need more story from people of color, or from women who've gone through a lot and then remain silent. Imagine a world without story and art and culture, it will be a very scary world. And now there's attacks against people of colors. It's so important for the story to be produced and heard and understood. Because of the politics right now, I also see with the young people more engagements. See what's happening in the societies and want to step up. And one way to step up is to support the story, tell the stories, read the stories. Because if you don't want things to repeat, you've got to know where you come from, the stories, and who you are. I was taught, know your history, know the self. What do you do when this history is not in history book, when the parents don't want to talk about it, or when they make up stuff? You need to know this, but it's not easy. Doing my research about my family, I'm discovering a lot of secrets, a lot of things I did not know. It reminds me, or anchor in me, the fact that I really belong to that Vietnam story and history. My centered, everything about me is about healing. I'm really invested in trying to heal myself and those around me. And as I'm getting older, I realize this is really who I am, so I just have to just be. And things are much easier that way than really pushing without a fire. This innate desire to heal, to bring people together. So now, as I'm trying to help others to heal and heal myself, I'm more in touch with that fire. I'm really impressed with the next generations, because I remember we had poems, but it was very nostalgic, longing from the past, and we really try really hard not to show ourselves and our vulnerability. now when I listen to the story, the poetry of the younger people, oh my goodness, it's so brave. Talk about vulnerability, like you read, you cry, and talking about the beautiful part of oneself, but also the not beautiful part of oneself. To write about anything that they feel like writing, I think that's beautiful and is very promising. If we can show, they see in some stories by having young people reading those stories, thinking about those stories, maybe participate in the creation of these stories, they can find ways to manage those emotions and heal. Because they grew up here, they've got the language and maybe benefited from the work from Asian Americanists, right? Feel like they have a space to speak, that for us we had to fight for that space. What I'm seeing moving forward is coming closer to the world that we wish we had.
Six lines included. All right, 6 lines around $20.
My name is Sammay, Samantha Floridison. I'm a healer, artivist, and truth speaker. I revel in the intersections of dance, performance ritual, theater, music, and multimedia. I'm from Carson, California. I'm really proud to be from Carson, so I just always I'm like, yeah, I'm from Carson. I love getting this question. I was just growing up in, I think, a place and time where being Filipino was normal. There was just this natural way in which we just celebrated who we are, who we were. But it was like Jollibee, it was Red Ribbon, it was Seafood City, it was Tambuli Market, it was St. Philomena Church every Sunday, if not always Saturday, if not Tuesday for catechism. Like, we were just all frequenting the same places because of those cultural ties that we had to those spots. And it was just, it was just kind of this like natural, organic, like, I'm Filipino, you're Filipino, our parents are probably friends, and if they're not already, they're gonna be. So that was a good, I think that was a really good way for me to grow up, especially as a daughter of immigrants. My parents came here in the 80s. It was a lot of knowing my cultural identity from an early age, but I would say it was knowing that cultural identity without so much the history and the socio-political factors and the truths really of what it means to be Filipino, what it means to be Fil-Am. I first started singing, I would see my older sister on the magic mic, on the karaoke, and everyone would like ask her to sing when we were like really early youth, and I just wanted to be like her, was like one thing. And And so I started also like singing, and that was also my like real introduction to hip hop and growing up in Carson and watching MTV every day was like those things in a dynamic relationship together. And I always knew I wanted to do hip hop. That was like ever since I was young. So in high school, I found actually musical theater, which was huge because that's when I started to combine the singing and dancing. And I didn't know it as art, you know, like dance and singing were just like kind of these things I love to do, I knew I was passionate about. But for my parents, of course, were always things that had to be on the side or had to be extracurricular. Very common story for the model minority. And when I had graduated from college at UC Berkeley, I went to a summer leadership institute run by urban bushwomen. The first time I was in a room of almost all women of color, mostly Black. Each person identified to some extent as an artist, cultural worker, activist, community leader, or scholar. And so being in that room was actually the catalyst moment for me to realize that what I was doing and what I wanted to move towards, that trajectory that was really meant for me, was to be an artist and to use these gifts and talents and experiences that I had just been doing just naturally growing up, to really realize how to just be a vessel, be a conduit, and have the art speak and have the message within the art. I think when I first started to really make art, I was just coming from my personal experience, and urban and indigenous was one of the very first projects I put out because I was in this deep inquiry and investigation for myself around my own indigeneity and how that plays in my life in the urban environment, and how just my journey of decolonizing and healing and working towards re-indigenization. How do we sustain ourselves? How do we get in right relationship with Mother Earth in this really, really crucial time in our humanity? Within my artistic practice, it honestly just requires a lot of me just sitting. But it really requires me to sit with my ancestors, sit with spirit, and just listen deeply as to what is needed, what is necessary. It's now a responsibility that I have to be a conduit for whatever needs to come through, whatever messages or whatever stories need to be told. So that is a really key part of my process, is just tuning in. Urban and Indigenous, the name itself, was coined by my mentor, Jack Gray. He was a big figure for me, continues to be, but was really that warrior spirit that helped me to understand that I had Indigenous roots. Being Indigenous was not one thing, but it was really about how do I facilitate, how do I manage, how do I move through this tension of honoring the Indigenous, honoring my Indigenous lineage, and also honoring that I don't live on my land. I don't live in a place where there are the teachers that can directly transmit to me our ancient traditions of Bicol, Kapampangan, and Ilocano. I always center the fact that I'm here because Soma is here. I'm here because Soma Pilipinas is present and vibrant and full of creative beings who've already paved the way and already made space Community is why I decided to be an artist or to pursue this path. Like, community is why I do art. Community is who I do art for, and that's been a really interesting tension for me, because artists are the heart of revolution, and artists are the voices of the stories untold. And I think in a lot of ways it's why I really choose to work here in Bendo Stiff, because my peoples are gonna come here, you know? And really for me, what I'm trying to understand is how to do it all and thrive. I think a big challenge of being an artist, of doing the work that I do, of like constantly choosing to be in community and to show up in a way that feels most authentic to me, requires a lot of sacrifice. And I'm trying to really come from a place where I know that I can be an artist and abundant. I'm basically continuing to say no. I'm continuing to say no. I will not be pushed out. I will not be in a place where I have to move. I'm going to continue to thrive. I'm also a teaching artist, and I get to work with the most amazing young ancestors in San Francisco. Every time we finally get to kind of swerve and veer away from the regular curriculum and do something that is more in my practice, every time I get to see them like create and do something that they've never done before in this life, I just, you know, it's an immediate gift back to all of it. And sometimes, you know, I think about what is possible in this lifetime. And I remember that each ancestor that's come before me has dreamt something for our generation, and that we're a generation continuing that, and that there will be the next generation that will continue that. And I think that in itself is always just a grounding tool to remember there's no need to burn out. There's no need to try to reach every single pinnacle possible in this lifetime, but to really just be in alignment and to be fully in my role and my purpose, my higher proposal. Like, that is actually what's going to propel forth the work that's needed for the liberation and healing and transformation.
So I grew up in North Beach, Chinatown area, and at that time the neighborhood was predominantly Italian, and we were one of the very first Chinese American families to move in there. So I grew up with a largely Sicilian kids I played with all the time. Chinatown in the old days was very different than the way it is today. It was a big community. In fact, our parents would know a lot of the shopkeepers, and so if you were naughty, it would get back to the family. And we were a little village unto ourselves. There was very little interaction or contact with other communities. When I finally got into a more mixed bag population in the schools, I realized that white people didn't think or act like we did. We had a very different sense of humor, a different outlook, different values, all the way down the line. It was a great culture shock to me to come to the realization that not all people are like us, Asians. I just assumed everybody was kind of the same because I grew up with those values. My awareness of racism came at a very early age, and I remember things that my father would say to me. I was working for CBS News at one time, and I was very proud of it, and I told my father that I was going to be, covering the news on television, and instead of happy, it struck me that he felt very concerned for me and a bit worried. He said, the white people are never going to let you get that far. At that time, there was not one Asian face in the news. Every newsroom was lily white. So we had to break open that industry. My short time in broadcast journalism happened when I was living in New York back in the early 70s. I was working for CBS News as a copy girl, and I had seen an ad saying that there was a program that was being offered in New York to train people of color to get into the industry. I researched it and actually applied and got into the program. That program had produced a lot of the first people, broadcasters of color, and not just in television, also in print journalism. When the story of Wounded Knee broke in 1973, they sent me out with a crew under cover of night, and I got in and I covered that story. But because of who I was and my great naivete at that time about how the political machinery works in a newsroom, in the media, I went out there and began my story with, "It's a good day to die." Quoting the American Indian and describing the physical phalanx of armored personnel carriers around the hamlet in Wounded Knee. To them, I think it made it look like it was going to be a massacre. They didn't like the way we were covering the story. The irony was that when I went back to New York, the president told me, maybe you should go into creative writing. And I thought about it, I said, yes, maybe I should. I think it would be an easier way for me to tell the truth than in the news. I was unwilling to make the kind of compromises that I would need to make to stay in that industry. When I came back to San Francisco, and I think at that point I became more serious in writing poetry. The poetry had always been there throughout middle school. I was writing some poetry. The time I lived in New York, I wrote a lot of poetry then and came back to San Francisco, and it was pretty much my hooking up with Kearny Street Workshop that got me back into writing in a communal environment. Having gone through that experience in New York with CBS and feeling estranged and alone, coming back to San Francisco and working with the Kearny Street writers was very nurturing for me. So writing is a process of self-discovery and self-exploration. It has to arise organically in my subconscious. And then I try to find a way to articulate it in order to understand it. And if I can understand what I'm feeling for myself, I'm thinking other people can understand what I'm feeling too. So I think what I'm trying to do is connect with other people when I'm writing. And I think my experience as a woman of color has a particular connection for other women of color experiencing, regardless of the generational difference. We all share a lot of the same experiences in our lives, dealing with sexism, dealing with the patriarchy within our communities, and dealing with classism. Those are some of the things I grapple with and try to understand why I have such strong feelings of anguish when I think about the injustice. I not only want to confirm and celebrate my community, I also want to challenge fellow artists in my community and fellow people of color in my community that we can think bigger, we can act bigger, and we can be better than simply existing, simply achieving success, simply gaining status and approval and wealth and political power in our community. But that's not enough. Once you achieve that, you bought into that hierarchy, and then you start replicating all the capitalistic values. How is that life you're leading helping the rest of the people who are left behind, the people in the margins? I think it's time to transform those systems. We have to change that hierarchical way of doing things so that everything is more consensual, everything is more inclusive. We all have achieved what we have on the shoulders of our predecessors. There's so many more opportunities today. We didn't have those opportunities. We really had to fight to get for any kind of visibility at all. And so what I want young people to realize is that you only got this not by your own steam. You only got this because you did it on the shoulders of the people that couldn't do it, but fought for it so that our children could have these opportunities. The advice I would give for the next generation of artists, especially Asian American artists, is to never forget the ones you leave behind. And that's not just, your family, but the community members. There's never that total satisfaction. It's because you have to give something back to that community. You have to keep struggling and resisting all the contradictions that you see. And when you have that power, that ability other people don't have, it's how you use your authority and your power that counts. It's not that you have it, it's what you do with it.
Hi, everyone. I want to thank all of you again for being here with us. If you feel like you need to take a deep breath after watching all of that, please feel free to do so. I think, our team, of course, we were disappointed that we could not do this in person because of COVID when we were supposed to have it last May. And I think we underestimated how powerful this program could be right now with everything that we are experiencing with our community, our Asian American community, seeing so much violence and having some of that trouble be part of because we're experiencing so much trauma in a country where we already feel like we don't belong. And so our team felt like it was really important to bring us back to these stories because the storytelling can be really central to healing and to feeling this belonging. And so I want to introduce our panelists for today. Unfortunately, Sammy See could not be with us today, and Isabelle Thuy Pelaud could not be with us as well. So I'm going to introduce some of our artists who were featured today and also our moderator for today. So Samantha Pena Floridison is a healer, interdisciplinary artist, singer, songwriter, cultural producer, and educator of Kapampangan, Ilocano, and Bicol descent, bred in Carson, California, Tongva Territory, and settled in San Francisco, California, Ramaytush Ohlone Territory. Since 2015, Dizon has performed professionally throughout the Bay Area and has toured nationally and internationally through both her performance practice and facilitation. She has been featured through Dance Mission Theater, Red Poppy Art House, Eastside Arts Alliance, and has worked with the Medea Project and Cool Arts. She's a core member of Embodiment Project, and some of her choreographic and directorial work includes Spirit of the Streets, Finding Space, Malice in Tenderland, Silbihan, and Daluyan. Dizon is a 3-time recipient of the Presented by APICC Artist Award, and as you all saw in her film today, is a founding artistic director of Intercultural Multidisciplinary Arts Festival Urban X Indigenous. Next, I'd like to introduce Francis Wong, considered one of the great saxophonists of his generation by the late jazz critic Phil Elwood. A prolific recording artist, Wong is featured on more than 40 titles as a leader and sideman. For over 2 decades, he has performed his innovative brand of jazz and creative music for audiences in North America, Asia, and Europe with such luminaries as John Jang, Tatsu Aoki, Genny Lim, William Roper, Bobby Bradford, John Cha, I can't pronounce this properly, Chikai, James Newton, Joseph Jarman, Don Moy, and the late Glenn Horiuchi. Wong's imaginative career straddles roles as varied as performing artist, youth mentor, composer, artistic director, community activist, nonprofit organization manager, consultant, music producer, and academic lecturer. Key vehicles for his work are Asian Improv Arts, the company he co-founded with John Jang, and as a senior fellow at the Wildflowers Institute. In addition, Wong has a California Arts Council artist in residence from 1992 to 1998 and a Meet the Composer new resident in 2000 to 2003. In 2000 to 2001, he was a Rockefeller Next Generation Leadership Fellow. What does Francis Wong not do? And I'd also like to introduce Genny Lim. Born in San Francisco, Genny earned a BA and an MA from San Francisco State University. She earned a certificate in broadcast journalism from Columbia University and later worked as a reporter, producer, and commentator for CBS News. Lim is the author of poetry collections like Winter Place, Child of War, and Paper Gods and Rebels, the children's book Wings for Lai Ho, and the plays Paper Angels and Bitter Cane, among others. Her work appears in The Politics of Life, 4 plays by Asian American women, the Oxford Book of Women's Writing in the United States, and Island, Poetry and History of Chinese Immigrants on Angel Island. Lim is the winner of the 1981 American Book Award from the Before Columbus Foundation. In 1982, she founded a theater company, Paper Angels Productions, now known as Theater XX, a company that performs experimental theater. Lim has taught at the New College of California, and her papers are held at UC Santa Barbara. And today's moderator, Valerie Soe, is an award-winning filmmaker, artist, and writer. Since 1986, her experimental videos, installations, and documentary films have received dozens of awards, grants, and commissions, and have exhibited at venues such as the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles, the Museum of Modern Art, the New Museum in New York City on cable and broadcast television, and at film festivals worldwide. Soe's short experimental video, All Orientals Look the Same, which she created while an undergraduate at UCLA, won Best Foreign Video at the 1987 Festival Internazionale Foreign Video at the Cinema Giovanni Torino, Italy. First place experimental category at the 1987 Sony Corporation Visions of US Festival, and honorable mention experimental video at the 12th Atlanta Film and Video Festival. She's obviously like incredibly awarded, and her experimental documentary, The Chinese Gardens 2012, was awarded Best Film with an Imagination theme at the 2013 Humboldt Film Festival. And she also just recently released her film, Loveboat Taiwan. And, you know, we are so incredibly lucky to be in the presence of such amazing and award-winning artists who not only like are incredibly innovative with their practices, but are so centered in their community. And so I am gonna let Val take it away to moderate the Q&A. And of course, we are gonna bring Laura in again as the producer and director of all of these films for the Q&A. Mel introduced her earlier. And so if you all feel like you have questions, feel free to share them in the chat or in the Q&A. And when there's time at the end of the moderated section, we'll answer your questions. Thanks, Val.
Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you all for sharing your amazing artwork with us. And thank you, Laura, for putting together these great films. It was really nice to see them all together as a series and see kind of the commonalities of people, you know, the creative people that you focused on across generations. I thought it was really interesting. So yeah, I just want to just start out just thinking a little bit about, you know, we're living in very turbulent times now. And I think, of course, we're always living in turbulent times, but especially now it seems for Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, that we're really more aware of how we're being impacted by, you know, the coronavirus and anti-Asian hate crimes and so forth. So I'm just trying to think about how you all see your work in the context of how you as artists and activists can contribute to this moment, how you can, you know, what some of you refer to as healing, or, you know, being more active in trying to make things better. So I don't know if anybody has a thought about that. Don't be shy. I could call on you. Jenny, do you have a thought about?
Well, I think
how that.
I was going to say males first because we're all because there's less of you than us. But anyway, I think it's what we've always been doing. I don't think we're needing to do any kind of shifts or about face. I think our work has always addressed topical issues, crises of the day. In fact, that's why our work had been dismissed and censored for so many years before the renaissance of, you know, people of color, arts and works. And we were dismissed as writers of, you know, propaganda, identity, you know, identity, PC writers. And that was just an easy way to avoid the issues of racism. So I think now that it's so clear and it's so in our faces what is actually happening, the veil has been lifted by Trump, but the problems had always been there. And the Chinese Exclusion Act, we just kind of went underground for a while, but all of those feelings had been suppressed all these years. And all it took was a trigger, you know, someone to lift Pandora's box, and Trump was the right person. And so it's all out in the open now. And I think for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, because we're all in it together, they're not going to differentiate us one from another. we're having to build solidarity and unity on this issue and try to transform this, shift the paradigm without making it worse. Because what I fear is there's been a lot of divisionism, and I see a lot of threads on Facebook by, like Asians saying that, well, most of these crimes are being committed by Blacks, and, and that just fuels more racism. So I think our work is to try to move through the superficial, aspects of what's happening and go to the deeper problem, which lies at the root of it, which is the structural racism in this country. So trying to find ways about it by not, politicizing and theorizing, but going to the stories is the way we do it. So I want to see if someone else can address this and how they do it in their medium.
I'd love to hop in, but I have to first say that I'm definitely having a fangirl moment, so please excuse me. Very honored to be speaking with both you, Genny and Francis, today, and especially after the whole program. Just thank you for being the trailblazers that you are and for shaping the way for all of us. Yeah, to follow what Genny said about anti-Blackness, I think this is a really crucial moment in solidarity building and understanding our true histories. And when I say that, I'm really speaking to specifically in the Filipinx community. There's really, I think, you know, I would call it a renaissance or a reinvigoration of our pre-colonial history, our pre-colonial traditions, and folks in the diaspora really, really, really doing the work to decolonize and lift up our ancestral inheritance, and how all of that is tied to the ways in which we've been shaped here in America, in the States, to reject Blackness and to serve as the model minority and to really assimilate right into this structure, into these hierarchies that are based in structural racism and white supremacy. So in my work, I'm really committed to embodiment, and embodiment beyond dance, embodiment in the sense of really connecting body, mind, and spirit. And I think that in our community is really where the crux is in terms of how we can start to really address mental health issues and these undoings of really our cultural values. I think growing up Filipinx, Filipino in America, there are just so many ways in which we've been pitted against our Black relatives, and it's really, I think, through the investigating of our traumas, personal and intergenerational, that we can actually start to understand where we intersect and really what our common goal is in the liberation work.
Thank you so much, Sammay. I do want to actually ask Francis about this, because I feel like you and I and Genny are old enough to remember the Third World Liberation Front, of course. And I think there's a very long tradition of communities of color working together, which have been very, that's not something that the dominant culture wants us to remember. So how do you feel like we can resurrect those coalitions that have always been ongoing in our communities and across our communities?
Well, I think it's a combination of the fact that I think Sammy, you talked about the conduit. That was in your and in so many ways we are on the record here. As far as artists, we are some of the few sectors in the society that still have a platform to say something in public. And we are, a conduit to the public of the past, of our lineages, and of our spirit. And it is important to, because the society so has such amnesia about the past, that we, in the forms that we do, music, dance, theater, visual arts, everything, that we are can broadcast loud and clear, from the past that we come from. And I know that it is a time to revitalize all our relationships. And I think we need that not only for the society, but for ourselves individually, to just so we can function and we can live and we can move through this time. So I know for myself, a lot of it is, just figuring out how we can get our lives, like with, let's say, for example, for all the African-American musicians I work with, Latino artists, everybody, how can we get our stuff online and how can we make our statement? And it's so important because it's kind of like, well, Valerie, you and I, we teach at State, so we're the continuation of the Third World Strikes, right? And so it all of a sudden becomes very important because the students are tuning in, once a week, twice a week, and we're the ones kind of bringing them the news, and and I just feel like that it's so much more responsibility in some ways because there's less distractions in a lot of ways. And so I'm finding like the students, so I have about 100 students, and so every week get in front of them, talk about Black Lives Matter, talk about anti-Asian racism, talk about our movement. And I just think that that's we have to get on it. So
Yeah, I feel like we're just, Asian American artists are just kind of like constantly pushing back against the false narratives in the mainstream corporate media that are trying to, suppress us and hold us back, because they know once we start to lift ourselves up, we'll have power and we'll be able to have control over our lives and not let them control us. So I just want to maybe talk a little bit with Laura a little bit about that, how you feel like doing these films maybe helps to amplify the work of the artists that you profiled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think really the core purpose of these films is to do just that, is to diversify the idea of what an Asian American Pacific Islander person looks like, what their journeys are, that we don't all just fit into this concept of the mono minority. And in fact, many of us live lives trying to fight against that concept, and to also struggle against, these structures that want to keep us all into these little boxes. And yeah, and Francis mentioned this idea of, how do we get online? These films are on YouTube. They're on APICC's channel. And that was very intentional because, at least for myself growing up, the concept of someone who looked like me being in the arts and culture, like I didn't really have an understanding of that. I didn't really have many folks to look to see what that is like or how that could be. And so in a sense, these films are hopefully a source that people can go to, or, something that they could, if they Google Genny Lim or Francis Wong, like these videos will come up. And they can learn a little bit about what that experience is for them, and connect and relate, and maybe see a potential for themselves of like how to do community work, how to be an artist, and yeah, just to broaden our experiences a little bit and to humanize these people also.
Yeah, totally. I feel, in the Bay Area, we kind of have been lucky to have a really vibrant Asian American arts community. But I mean, if you're some kid out in the middle of some place where there aren't that many Asians, and you look up, you Google somebody, and there's that clip. It's like, oh my God, there's someone doing spoken word. There's someone doing dance performance. There's someone playing a saxophone, or writing poetry who looks like me, who talks like me, who has my experiences. So I think that's super powerful. Yeah. And just, maybe continuing on, I'm writing a post about it. Continuing on that thought, someone asked about support, emotional support and mentorship for your work. And I'm wondering, especially now that we're all kind of like very separated physically from each other, can you guys talk a little bit about how you're kind of keeping those connections and keeping that community during the pandemic? Because I feel like everybody here is working very much in a collaborative way with folks. So how are you keeping up those collaborations? Sammy, do you have anything thoughts about that? Because I know, you know, as a theater artist, especially, right? You're not in a theater. You can't do theater. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks for that question. I think that's really been a challenge, you know, for me in this time, having gone from being in a space like flesh to flesh, breath to breath with my collaborators to just you know, now I would say there's more capacity. I'm feeling that each of us has more capacity to be present with each other, but you know, on top of the violence in our communities, I don't know anyone who has not been struggling with mental health or other grief, you know, family. There's just so much happening. But I'll say for myself, in addition to really actually having to kind of take space from community, is actually where I've been more so in this time, just to tend to my own personal life, but really, really checking in with folks in a really like non-work way, like non-exchange way, you know. I've been really tending to the relationships that I think need tending to, whether that has to do with conflicts arising in relation to this huge time that we're in, or just relations that I know that are really going through it. So I think there's been that kind of more, it's like a collective care, but really focused on a very like internal world, if that makes sense. So yeah, I would say I haven't been making as much, you know, work or art as maybe pre-COVID, but it's really keeping the relationships close as possible.
I think that what you said about this being an opportunity to have relationships that aren't about exchange is kind of really interesting, because you don't have like that transactional aspect of it. So it's almost like you just start caring for people because you care about them, not because you necessarily want something from them. So that's exactly. Maybe that's a silver lining that we can think about.
Yeah, that word too, transactional. Thank you. That's the one.
Yeah. Genny, or Francis, do you want to, or Laura, do you want to add anything to that idea of how you're getting by, or how you keep in connections with folks?
Well, I think that as musicians, we're able to make work based on our use of technology, and the whole idea that I think time. See, we're kind of used to doing things all at the same time, but I think that we're finding that, well, sometimes people say this time doesn't really exist, because so if I lay a track down on Audacity and then I send it to Wesley over in Okinawa, and he can put something, you know, put his voice on it, and then we bounce it over to Scott in Washington, DC, you know, and then put it out there, you know, or just like at some performances, like me and Wesley, we'll just figure out how to perform. We can't perform exactly at the same time, except when we perform, we can be in the same moment, you know? So we have to think about the space that we make our work in a very different idea about time, because only time is just one dimension, you know? And so what I find is that it's so important for us, I know it's been important for me to keep putting work out there and being in performances, and so that people know, hey, we're alive, we're doing this stuff, you know, and we're fighting every day. And I just think that that's really makes a difference to all of us, so that in some ways, you know, I've been in performances, you know, because people are hungry. They, you know, as much as we all hate Zoom in some ways, you know, people getting on there, you know, 200 people, 300 people to try to get a piece of the news. It's kind of like sometimes when you see in the movies or whatever, people gathering around the TV sets in the store window, you know, to see something that's happening. And so I think that's been very important for me to continue to just figure out, okay, so through the technology, how do we have new forms of creativity to make work?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, just to be continuing to make work despite all of the adversities. And I feel like, you know, people of color are used to that. We're used to fighting through struggle. So yeah, a lot of us. And still we rise, right?
That's right.
Jenny, do you have a thought?
Social media has a upside as well as a downside, and Francis has talked about the upside of it is that you can be transnational. You can, you know, have a Zoom with people from Europe. You know, you just put in the time zone, and you have people in LA. This is something you couldn't do if you were performing live in a venue somewhere in the Bay Area. So now our boundaries are more opened up. And so that space is just imaginary. When you think of our boundaries are all projections. So once we enter into that space, that's really one mind, we can connect with so many people, you know, at the same time. And it's almost magical for me, you know, coming from, you know, a Luddite background, not know anything about technology, but you know, you're able to make a quantum leap with someone in the polar, you know, in the North Pole, and we can use this as a tool of liberation and revolution. And we don't have to rely, and the young people don't even watch, you know, like the mainstream corporate news. They rely on each other, you know, for what's really going down, you know, in Minneapolis. We saw the news, but tell us, you know, what's really happening. And so we can circumvent all the propaganda, you know, and the newspeak and all of that. And we can really wage effective revolution. And so I think with the arts, that's even, it really pushes the boundaries even further for us to do things. On the downside is that they're, you know, they're hip to what we're doing. And so that's why they're, you know, clamping down with the censorship. If you look at Facebook, you know, Twitter and all of that, they're, you know, censoring a lot of they've sent, you know, I've been blocked like 4 or 5 times, suspended for a month on Facebook.
I bet you have, Jenny.
But, you know, and then I just now wait a month to get back on whatever. I don't, you know, need to be on Facebook, but if I have that tool, I'm going to use it. So I think we need to be savvy about, you know, how we use this tool to organize and connect with each other, and to connect, especially with right now with the African American community.
Yeah.
And to, you know, let them talk to their people on the streets, and, you know, like say, wake up, guys, you know, this is not the way to go. You know, we have a bigger fish to fry than, you know, hitting 100-year-old man, you know, and grabbing whatever, his wallet or whatever. So
yeah,
I think that's how I feel, is that everybody has to put their hand, you know, put their hand or their shoulder to the wheel and do their part, you know, and not, this is not the time. We have the tools. You don't have to leave it to your community leaders, your supervisors, your mayor, whatever. The young people know we can do the work ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what you said about it being conscious of the tools and using them for you know, what you need to use them for, and not let the tools control you, is really important.
Yeah.
So, and young people are totally aware of that. I mean, younger, like teenagers or whatever, right? They're not dependent on one platform. They're not dependent on one app. They're not dependent on one mediation, and they're very nimble about jumping from one to the other. And so, yeah, we can learn from those folks. Yeah. Are there other questions in the chat that anybody wants to drop in there? I'm trying to see.
Val, we have a question.
Oh, Q&A.
A Q&A, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Do you want me to read it off to you?
I can see it.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question from James. Where would you like to direct people's attention regarding solidarity efforts between Asian and Black and Pacific Islander communities in the current moment? This can be in terms of organizations who've been doing this work, energies, tools, or types of healing, or types of politicking. Yeah. Looks like there's 2 questions from James, so maybe we'll just talk about that one. So yeah, what are some strategies or methodologies or orgs that are doing work that you feel has been effective?
Well, I just want to mention the work of the Chinese Progressive Association and a lot of organizations such as CPA, who did, are doing actions that to try to bring attention to this and to demand, the movement, movement around this. And I think there was a nice podcast that if you follow Alicia Garza, who was one of the founders of the hashtag Black Lives Matter. So she had a nice podcast, I think it was a week ago, with Alex Tom, who's a Chinese American. He used to be the executive director of the Chinese Progressive Association. And the two of them have had a long, 20-year history of working together. And they had a pretty frank discussion about these issues. So, search for Alicia Garza. She's on Instagram. Well, she's like part of the, really the kind of groundbreaking work on using social media for organizing. And so I think she's been covering a lot of stuff in there, and I think very articulate conversation. Yeah.
We have that podcast in the chat. There's a link to it that Kimberly has kindly supplied for us. There it is. Okay. Other folks have a thought about any other methods or folks or organizations that you feel are working in a really interesting way to do this, or maybe in your own work? How are you as creators trying to work for that kind of like intersectional change?
Yeah, I want to lift up DJ Cut and Candy, Pena, MC, hip hop, just like trailblazer herself, who's actually located in San Diego, but I know she and a bunch of organizers last summer, definitely in response to the uprising. Yeah, James knows. Created this incredible organization that is really responding to Black Lives Matter from the Asian front. And I'm positive. I'm always like following her things. I can't remember. I'll look it up and drop it in the chat. But also her being a cultural worker in the realm of hip hop, I think is really key in this moment, because Asian Americans and Black community within the context of hip hop is always both a point of tension and deep love and solidarity. I know there's in the Bay, there's Phil Wong and Ashley Smiley, who are amazing theater makers, are hosting like these happy hours, I think on Thursday evenings, to kind of just, be in the joy and the relationships of our solidarity. That's, that is without anything, it is. We have these friendships, we have these collaborations. And Francis, I know like I feel watching your video, just seeing who you collaborate with, I think is a reflection of my work as well, and how these are our fam, it's family, it's family business. And I think the more artists that are bringing that forth, that this is just who we are as artists, this is how we connect through the art, and it's beyond it, it's really on a spiritual plane where we connect through the art. I think there's a lot of medicine there, And I feel like more and more there's going to be more explicit ways that folks bring that forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great that there are so many people who are, you know, even prior to sort of the mainstream media latching onto a lot of these issues, this is very deep rooted stuff that folks have been doing for a while. So it's great that it's just, you know, we have those relationships in place. And I feel like now that folks are able to kind of work with those things. So that's a really great thing to remember. I see something else here in the Q&A. So James has another question. So this is a more practical question. How do you manage multiple large projects, especially if you have multiple things to be scheduled closely together? What kind of tools do you use for this, either physical or spiritual? And also, what kind of relationships do you hope to cultivate in the process of big projects? If you have any. And that can, I don't know, Laura maybe also has, if you have any thoughts about that too. There's another link in the chat to another group that is doing relevant work, I think. And maybe this can also just relate to sort of more personal, like support and mental health as far as being creators who maybe do have to have, like, well, I'm sure all of us have to have jobs where we make a living, because I feel like none of us make a living being artists, you know. At least I certainly don't. So how are you able to kind of keep yourself like balanced and with all the stresses?
Well, I mean, I like to think of myself as an organizer, community organizer, and that as a community organizer, I'm not an organizer of one, I'm part of a movement. And I think even more critical today to build movements, even if the movement is 2 people, 3 people, 50 people, it doesn't really matter. It's just this idea of reaching out beyond ourselves, and and then also to be part of a crew, you know, and it's so important, you know, to be able to identify who is your crew, because right now, see, a lot of times we before the pandemic, we would just go on and we do our work, you know, all these people, but we don't always focus in on who's our crew. And because part of having the crew, and, you know, for musicians, we think about who's in the band, you know, so we think about, you know, how do we take care of our band members, you know, and who's in the ensemble, you know, and that what's happening, you know, between the pandemic and the rise of, you know, racism under Trump is a, you know, direct attack on our teams, you know, and we have to be responsive to that, and because the integrity of our teams, integrity of our crews, the integrity of our community is how we can do multiple large projects. I know for myself, that's always been the case for the last more than 30 years. So just like, you know, whether it's folks in Chinatown, like the CPA, like CPA was accused of being behind Black Lives Matter because the Trump forces were saying that Black Lives Matter was a Chinese communist plot. You know,
Oh,
so you know, we had to, you know, come to defense of Black Lives Matter, CPA, and because we can't do our work if our friends and who do work in the community are, you know, they aren't there anymore, you know, and so that's what's extremely disturbing also about COVID, you know, that, you know, we're losing, you know, a lot of our people, you know, and so being able to make sure that, hey, here's where they're doing the vaccines, you know, tomorrow, 5 minutes from now, you know, this is all part of, like, because it's become things have become very immediate.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. And I feel like one of the strengths of, again, the Asian Pacific artists community is that we do emphasize collaborative work, working through, you know, as opposed to individualism. So not that everybody is that way, of course, it's a big generalization, but there is there are a lot of folks who do work collaboratively and understand that you have to have, like you said, that crew, like, you know, so yeah. And just want to give a shout out quickly to one of the very important people that we did lose. I was just at his memorial earlier today, Corky Lee, the photographer in New York City, who documented Asian America for decades. And, but at his memorial, there were 400 people, and they were all talking about how we all work together and how he helped to lift up everybody else and not just himself. The important thing for him was to lift up others. And I think that that's, you know, kind of echoes what a lot of you all are saying. And Genny said that too, you know, how can we use our position to help others and not forget those we've left behind? Okay, so I think we're running out of time. So I do want to thank you guys. I'm going to pass this off to Vinay. And thank you again for this incredible conversation and for the wonderful work. Thank you, Laura, for the beautiful films and for bringing all of these stories together.
Thank you, Valerie.
Well, this was a wonderful program. I want to thank everybody at APICC, Diana, Melanie, Laura. You're still APICC. You know, you haven't left. So I want to thank Laura. It was really special for me to see. I remember when we came up with this program. You know, I said, Laura, this is not what you want to be office and communications manager. What do you really want to do? And so I said, okay. And she said this, and we put our efforts around it. And today, you know, we have this program. So it's very fulfilling, you know, for that. So, and thanks Sammay, Samantha, Francis, Genny, you know, Valerie, Isabelle, you know, all of you. Thank you so much, because this was, you know, very wholesome in a way, you know, that we get to reflect upon our community, you know, and take a pause, because we're such strong activists in our lives and in the art that gets produced, that we rarely actually get to spend time saying, you know, thank you. So I want to thank all the artists, not just everyone here, but all of our artists who are in the community doing the work right now around anti-Asian violence. Around, we have artists that are actually doing food deliveries that are not thanked and are not looking for thanks, but we want to say thank you. To continue with the thank yous, you know, Asian Pacific Island Cultural Center is one of 7 city cultural centers supported by the San Francisco Arts Commission and San Francisco Grants for the Arts. We also want to thank California Arts Council, Local Impact, and also the Zellerbach Family Foundation for supporting this work. And again, thanks everybody who joined today. And Kimberly, thank you too. So thank you for, you know, hosting us and helping us get this together. Valerie, thanks for being the moderator. And yeah, thank you. Let's do this again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Happy
Thank
Sunday.
you.